All right, commissioners, we're going to go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So welcome to our first meeting of 2020. Might take us a little while to get used to saying that and writing it. But we're happy to be joined today with our new commissioner. We do have a different seating chart up here, but welcome, Commissioner. Good to have you for your first meeting and Committee of the Whole. So we'll get started, Commissioners. On our agenda today, we have a couple informational and update items before we get to action items. So I'll turn it over to our city manager to get us started on our first item, which is our 2019 audit wrap-up.
Thank you, Mayor. We're pleased today to have a good report of our city financials, and our city deputy comptroller and Plant Moran will come and provide us an update on our 2019 offer and our audit in our CAFR.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Happy to present our fiscal year 2019 audit wrap-up. I first would like to thank the rest of the Comptroller's Office for being such a big help getting us through this, that they work hard every year to go through our audit. I'd like to thank Erica Bills, our internal auditor, and Tricia Chapman, our financial analyst, too, that do a lot of the heavy lifting along with me. And I have here from Plant Moran, Joe Kowalski and Marie Stiegel to present to you some of the wrap-up in their memo, as well as our memo that highlights some of the highlights of our financial position, which we ended up very well. We have an unmodified opinion, and we have good financial position to report.
Great.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you to this honorable body for the opportunity to come today and appear before you and present the results of our audit. I'm Joe Kowalski. I'm the audit partner. This is our second year completing the audit. It's a rigorous process, and so I'd like to echo Ruth's comments in thanking the Comptroller's Office and the entire administration, and of course Erica and Tricia as well. We bring a small army on site for 4 weeks, and so it's very disruptive, I think, to their day-to-day activities to have auditors on site for that long, and they are very patient and cooperative and very well prepared for the audit. And so also would just like to reiterate what Ruth said. It's a clean opinion, which is the highest form of assurance you can get. It means that your financial statements can be relied on. And with me today is Marie Stiegel, who's the senior manager on the engagement. And she is going to go through the letter that's in your packet, which has a little bit more details about the results of the audit.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Good morning.
Auditing standards do require auditors to communicate to those charged with governance at the beginning and the end of the audit process. To that end, we issued a letter to the commission at the beginning of the audit, and I'm presenting now the letter, as Joe mentioned, that's in your packet. I just want to go through some of the highlights of that letter. A lot of it's boilerplate required language, so I want to really highlight what's specific or unique for the city that should be paid special attention to in that letter. First, the city did adopt 3 new accounting standards this fiscal year, fiscal year 2019. Those were GASB 83, which relates to asset retirement obligations, GASB 88, which relates to debt disclosures, and GASB 89, which relates to capitalized interest. All of those were implemented appropriately in the CAFR that's presented to you. Really, the major change was the long-term debt footnote required some different disclosures to kind of highlight debt that's considered direct placement or direct obligation debt, and that's called out in the debt footnote in the CAFR that was issued. There was no impact of GASB 83 related to asset retirement obligations. None were identified through a process that management went through to speak to different departments that may have knowledge of those. Again, none were identified. And GASB 89 related to capitalized interest for business type capital assets. Really, that standard just takes away the requirement to capitalize interest, so that was implemented appropriately. There are certain estimates that are used to prepare the CAFR. Everything isn't based on an invoice or a cash receipt, so there are certain estimates that go into that. We're required to just discuss with you any significant estimates. The most significant would be estimates that are used to calculate the net pension and net OPEB liabilities. And those estimates relate to actuarial assumptions and methods that are used and relied upon. We did evaluate all of those assumptions and methods and determine them to be reasonable as it relates to preparation of the CAFR. We just always encourage management to continuously evaluate those estimates every year to ensure that they are remain appropriate. We did look at specifically the rate of return that's used in the estimate of the net OPEB obligation. It is based on a lot of projections of the cash flows and such. And so we just continuously tell management to look at that, make sure that's a reasonable estimate. Again, we did determine that they were all reasonable as far as the preparation of the CAFR. We did obtain representations from management at the end of the audit, just stating that they've provided us all the appropriate information that we requested as part of the audit. And we've also read any informational sections of the CAFR that we don't give an opinion on, such as the statistical section, introductory section, and we didn't note any inconsistencies in those information. The end of our letter that you have in your packet also gives some information on legislative items and upcoming accounting pronouncements. I won't go into those in detail. We're happy to discuss them if there's any questions. I would just say there are some significant new accounting pronouncements coming down the road related to leases and fiduciary activities. We've already began working with the city on the fiduciary activity standard, which will be implemented next year, and will continue to do so prior to getting to the next fiscal year end, so that can be implemented appropriately next year as well. With that, again, I'd like to thank management, the comptroller's office, and everyone that helped with the audit. And if there's any questions that we can address, we'd be happy to do that at this time.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions? Well, I appreciate it. I want to thank our Deputy Comptroller for her work on this. And then I see our new comptroller, Mr. France, in the back. Hopefully he feels good about stepping into this role after hearing a positive audit wrap-up. And I know that he'll be actively engaged in the year ahead. So again, thank you. And commissioners, if you do have any follow-up questions, just be sure to reach out to our Deputy Comptroller. City Manager, anything to add?
No, Mayor.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to a 2020 census update. So I know many of you have been actively engaged in this work with me with the Complete Count Committee over the last year. We kicked off that committee just about 13 months ago.
That's right.
Spent a lot of time last year gearing up and doing planning. Here at the city, we have Mr. Canfield, who's been taking the lead on this work. And then, as you know, in our budget last year, we allocated funds to hire some additional staff, knowing that this is a top priority for us as an organization, but also for the community. And Mr. Canfield has hired a number of folks to help him lead this effort, including Ms. Harris, who I'm sure we'll hear from today. So I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Canfield to give us an update, and then also to let us know how we can continue to be not just supportive, but actively engaged in this work over the next 3 months. So,
All right.
thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning.
So as the mayor mentioned, I've been engaged in this work for the last 13 months as the city's Complete Count Committee liaison. That's a title that employees or volunteers have in communities all across the country where those communities are assisting the Census Bureau to get out the word about the census. So I want to introduce you to, or introduce Kathy Harris to you, and she's going to say a few words about herself.
Good morning and Happy New Year as well. My name is Kathy Harris, and I come on board in August as the census coordinator, and we have done a lot of great things we'll talk about, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here.
All right, and I also want to point out Joe Janitis, who's in the audience. He is the Census Bureau Partnership Specialist assigned to this region, so we're working very closely coordinating with him. All right, just to give you a very brief recap on information that many of us know about, but it may be helpful to community members who are watching. The census is a once every decade opportunity that is important to the city for 4 key reasons. A lot of federal funding, more than $680 billion is allocated based upon the census count. Some of that money flows to the city. A lot of it flows to partners in our community that are focused on education, healthcare, and other things. The data is also used to allocate political representation. So the number of congressional representatives that Michigan is entitled to is determined by the census count, and then the data that's produced is used to draw district boundaries within the state. So very important for that reason as well. Businesses use census data to make their decisions in terms of what types of businesses locate and where they locate. So it's important economically. And then census data is used for program planning by all levels of government and by many of our nonprofit partners. So census data is vital for our community. Census Day is April 1 of 2020. That means that wherever residents live on that date is where they are to be counted. So one group I get questions about is college students, and where are they counted, and if they reside in the location where they are attending college, that's where they're counted. So that's a significant component of Grand Rapids count. Our goal is an 85% self-response rate, meaning that individuals receive an invitation to turn in a census form, either online, on paper, or by phone, and they respond in one of those ways. So our goal is an 85% self-response rate. The rate was 77% in 2010, so we're shooting for a bit higher level, and we're going to describe some of the ways in which we are working to achieve that. Quick timeline recap. So mid-March is when people will receive an invitation to respond to the census. Most will receive that invitation in the form of a prompt to go online and fill out the form. This is the first census that people can complete online. Some households will also receive a paper questionnaire at that time. And there are some locations in Grand Rapids where that will be true. So the southwest side and then southeast, essentially north of Hall, is a good approximate way of describing where people will receive both options up front. But most people will receive just the prompt to go online initially. If they don't fill it out online within a couple of weeks, then they will receive a reminder letter, followed by potentially a reminder postcard. And then in early to mid-April, those who haven't responded online would receive a paper questionnaire. So those who don't get it up front will still get that option later. And then there'd be a final reminder before a census worker follows up in person by actually knocking on the door of someone who hasn't submitted the form. So our goal is to get the self-response rate up. It's not that people who don't submit the form won't be counted, it's just there's greater risk they won't be counted because we're relying then on the people going door to door and people answering the door, being home, and so on. So this slide shows some census tracts within the city that are dark blue, which are the ones that are estimated by the Census Bureau to have a risk of approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of residents not self-responding. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be counted later by someone knocking on the door, but there's a greater risk of them not being counted. So what we're doing is we are trying to, through engagement efforts, outreach efforts, move the needle here so that people are educated about the importance of the census and are motivated to self-respond. And so we're going to describe some of the ways that we're working to achieve that. At the far right of this slide, one of the key messaging points that we are emphasizing is 10 minutes equals roughly $18,000 per person over a decade in funds flowing to support schools, hospitals, transportation, and other services. So that seems to be a significant motivator for people, and it's something that is surprising to some people that so much money is allocated based on the census count. Here are some things that we're doing to help move the needle on that self-response rate. So we're forming partnerships with both recipients of Heart of West Michigan United Way mini grants and also other organizations. So we've partnered with nearly 40 organizations. We're really emphasizing person-to-person outreach, which Kathy will describe in a moment. So she's been working at this for several months. And we also have 5 census ambassadors, including 2 Spanish speakers, who are doing a lot of this person-to-person engagement at events, at community meetings. We're finding this is critical to persuading people of the importance of the census and giving them a desire to participate. It's that in-person outreach that gets the attention of people who are on the fence or maybe skeptical versus just distributing literature. We are also doing some direct marketing with palm cards, posters, things like that, and we have presence on the 3 major social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have an opportunity to not just like these pages, but also to share them and suggest that those within your networks follow them, that would be very helpful in terms of increasing the awareness of the census. At this point, Kathy's going to describe some of the partnerships and events that we've been participating in.
Great. Thanks, Lynn.
Not only have we talked to and met with the many grantees through that was sponsored through United Way, I've met a lot of great organizations and a lot of great people in doing so. And if you see some of the names on here are just a few of the names of organizations that I've talked to. There are so many more, and I've met a lot of great people with doing that. We've reached over 6,000 individuals. We've talked to over 60 organizations and events to meet with the community because we want to have a cross-section of the community with informing them about the census. So we're continually doing that. That number is continually growing. One of the events that we attended was at a Spanish-speaking church on the southwest side. We had lunch with them. They were signing up for a food truck, so we met with them, talked to them about the census, and met with their families. This event was held at a Seventh-day Adventist church. We talked to a group of African residents, refugees, and explained to them, we had an interpreter, and we talked about the census and explained to them what's going on with the census to make them more comfortable. Our goal is to make sure that they understand how important the census is and how it will affect their community. Even though they may not be citizens, they're still residents in Grand Rapids, and we want to make sure they're included in that number. Excuse me. We met with some of the pastors. We had a luncheon with the faith-based organizations and the churches. And so we talked to them about it because they have that trust and relationship with their congregations, and that's something that we're continually doing. But we did have a luncheon and met with them and talked to them about and answered the questions that they had concerning their memberships. We also met with the private school. It's a beauty school that's owned with Grand Rapids residents. They're young people. We want to make sure they understand how important they are as well, so we met with them. We had an event with Dégagé Ministries because the homeless counts as well, and they're just as important as the rest of us. And so we wanted to make sure that they understood that. These are a couple of posters that we create or have created for organizations. We get their pictures of their people, put it on the posters, put their name on it so that their community can relate to them and see their faces and know that they are supporting this effort as well. So every organization, if they don't have anything out there, we help them create that information and create those posters. Here's one that we created for the West Michigan Hispanic Center, and we have it in both languages for their community. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as we approach Census Day, the tempo of our marketing efforts and those of other agencies, including the Census Bureau, is going to increase. And some of the things that we'll be working on are a water bill insert for the next mailing. We're working on yard signs, stickers, clings, billboards, and these other types of advertising, including some radio spots. So this seems like the time. We're just a few months out to really be picking up the tempo on the marketing effort.
I just want to add too, before I talk about the assistance centers, we have our material printed in right now, it's 6 different languages, and we are working on a couple of more so that we can make sure that they can read our information. We have assistance centers. Right now, we have at least 40 assistance centers that have agreed to help the community. And what this is, assistance centers are places that the community can go to if they need help, if they have questions, if they don't have a computer. For whatever reason, we have locations covered throughout the city. And if you can see some of the tabs that are on here, we want to make sure that all the wards are covered. So with that, we're still adding to that list. But right now, we have a pretty good cross-section of the community so that they're set up to help the community.
This is our last slide. The recent state supplemental appropriation included $10 million for census outreach. And the city will be applying for some of the funds that are going to be made available for local communities. The state is finalizing the programming, including how the budget will be allocated. That should be done in the next few weeks. Our understanding is that they will accept grant applications in late January, possibly extending into early February, and then making awards promptly after that. So time is short. Our understanding is they're going to move quickly, and our focus is on identifying projects where a significant amount of money can make a large difference in a short amount of time. So that gets at some of the marketing initiatives I identified in the previous slide, and expanding those. So that would be a significant component of what we would use state funding for.
Thanks. All right, I'll turn to my colleagues for questions. I'll start with Commissioner Jones.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the update on this morning to both of you. And I'm wondering, is it safe to assume that because we're the second largest city in the state that we should be able to, I guess, be successful in tapping into some of these dollars that are made available by the state, and perhaps the amount would be a rather decent amount, again, based on the fact that we're the second largest in the state?
Yeah. Based on preliminary conversations with those who are organizing this at the state level, we think that's likely, that we would have significant additional resources that we'll be able to leverage.
Very good. Also want to make a recommendation that if there's a need to get a message out by way of the basketball court, I want to suggest my colleague Commissioner Lanier, as she has shown herself strong on the court, in and around the court. So if there's a need for that, just want to make sure that you talk with her. Thank you.
Basketball outreach.
We might be able to design some Be Counted GR shoes or something.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes, I am curious to find out, and talking with the immigrant community, what were some of their concerns about the census?
The fear of being turned into ISIS is one of the conversations that I have. Some of those that are not citizens yet, not sure if they could fill out the paperwork because they're not citizens, and just not knowing, because the last census they were not reached. This is the first time they've ever heard about it, and some of them are, older. You would think they would have heard, but they didn't. And so I've met with the Refugee Education Center, Bethany Christian Services, West Michigan Friendship Center. There's several different organizations I've met with that handles their cases. And so we're working on the interpretation to make sure they understand. But that's one of the biggest fears, is just being caught and turned in.
Now, is there a large African community out there that are immigrants? Do you have a census number on that community at all at this point?
Yes, there is a large number. I've met with Pastor Bernard at the African Resource Center, and he has a list of 40 churches that we're working on and connecting with the pastors of those churches, because that's a big thing for them, is to reach out to the various churches. So that's where we are working on that. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question, Commissioner Moody. And Mr. Canfield, can you maybe speak to a couple issues? I know they've come up when we've met with the larger Complete Count Committee, but can you speak to the laws related to confidentiality of information, and that the information cannot be shared with other federal departments like Homeland Security? And then also, I know in meetings that we've had, the other concern that consistently comes up is security of information if people are completing the form online, and is that going to be secure? So can you maybe speak to both of those items, or maybe even our point person with the Census Bureau can come up and address those?
Sure, I think I can address those, and I want to clarify, in Kathy's remarks, the organization that people have been referring to as having some concern about is ICE, and that's Immigration Customs Enforcement. So just being clear on that. So federal law provides that census data is confidential. And it is so for more than 7 decades. So people who do genealogy research may have come across census records. Well, those are many decades old, so federal law provides that it's confidential for more than 70 years. And the only thing census data can be used for that is released outside of the Census Bureau is statistical data, so aggregates about Grand Rapids, what percentage of people rent or how many people live in Grand Rapids. So it's not about individual data, it's about those statistics. There are watchdog groups that are making sure that the Census Bureau is adhering to these laws, so we don't have to just say like, trust that the people who are governed by these are following them. Like people are paying close attention to this who are not connected with the Census Bureau. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first census that people can complete online. The Census Bureau has partners. I believe Microsoft is one of them, where they are working with both in-house and also industry-leading experts on things like encryption and data security and all that kind of stuff. So I think my understanding is they are applying as good of security practices as are out there to this effort.
Okay, great. So I have additional
One quick one.
questions. So Commissioner O'Connor and then Commissioner
Just
Lanier.
as you look at partners, has there been any outreach and work with our LGBTQI community as well? And how are we working to make sure that they're, the outreach and engagement is?
Yes, we have reached out to them, and we are continually doing that. I will be meeting with some of their programs that they have, but we have to make sure that they're okay with us coming in and talk to them. So yes, we are doing that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Lanier?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a few quick questions, I think. At the beginning, you mentioned during the March 12th through 20th time period that the online form will be made available, and that's the preference for completing the census. And I'm just curious to know, how will people be informed that the online form will be available? I'm guessing that there isn't like a database of email addresses, but it'll be published in multiple locations?
They'll actually receive it by mail. So
Okay.
the Census Bureau, and we've already worked with the Census Bureau to provide any new residential locations constructed in the last decade. So we've worked with them to provide all of those new addresses. So regardless of whether people just receive the online invitation or receive both in mid-March, it's going to come by mail.
Okay. And then, so why are they opting not to just send the form by mail, like in years past?
Well, I can only speculate. I think it's because of a few reasons. One is a lot of people just have a preference to fill out forms online. It can be more convenient. I think, like the city's experience has been in terms of moving to digital first, it's also, more efficient for the agency.
Okay. I'm just looking at the multiple mailers.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, okay, just send the form already. Then my next question is on slide 3, and it's the graphic that talks about your 10 minutes equals $18,000. Do you have funding streams that the money would come from so that it kind of resonates with the person who's receiving this type of information? I can see someone asking exactly how does the $18,000 come in
Yeah.
the city through these, multiple areas, roads, schools, and hospitals. Like, how would I, as a parent of kids in the schools, how will that translate for me?
Yeah, and the best we've been able to do there, because a lot of this data is tracked at the county level, not the city level.
Okay.
And it can vary based on, what is the nature of your community? Is it urban? Is it rural? So as the best we've been able to do so far is break that funding stream. These are all federal grants we're talking about. So we've categorized those, and we've come up with approximately how much of this 18,000 is in each of those major categories, like education, healthcare, nutrition. But that's based on statewide averages.
Okay.
So we have an approximation, but I don't think we'll ever be able to produce like precise data on how much of this flows to community health centers in Grand Rapids.
Yeah,
But we can get close.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's the number as much as it's the category. So for example, if it's Title I funding that goes to free and reduced lunch programs, that helps a parent to say, okay, this is how
Yeah.
my household is impacted by that, or something like that, I think would be great to know in the event that someone asked that question.
Okay, and we certainly can provide that.
Yeah, and Commissioner, that's a good point, because I thought the same thing. I know for city funds, there's a number of funding, federal funding streams that utilize census data as part of the formula, like community development block grants and our crime prevention efforts and home dollars and HUD and Section 8 and, you know, so I think these are important categories, but we know that there's a lot more. And so I wonder if we need to, in some of our marketing material, drill down a little bit further and talk about, you know, census data is included in formulas that are utilized to allocate funds that impact a whole host of community funding streams, including city funding streams.
Yeah. And then my last question really is about the marketing materials. It was on slide 12. You indicated that organizations, if they wanted to create something unique, and I like the way, you know, the organization's pictures are within those flyers, how would they go about making a request if they had interest in this?
Well, because I meet with them individually, I usually ask them to send me pictures, and we talk about it. And they indicate at that point if they want us to help them create the posters or not.
So if an organization is watching this and they may not have already had some contact with your office yet, how would they go about connecting so that they can get the materials?
Through our contact information.
Want a good way for them to start? Would that get us into the system 301? Okay. And then I think my last question was on slide 15. It's regarding the assistance centers. And I'm just curious to know, like, the office hours of those centers, and if there's a list of all the locations. And when will they open? I think it was saying February, but if you have a date yet, that would be good to.
Okay, right now we're scheduled to open all of the centers as of March 2nd.
Okay.
We will have a list of every center on our websites, all of our social media, but we're also going to create signage for the different various locations. We ask them who's going to be their contact person and what time do they want to have what hours do they have, what days they want to open. So we kind of leave it up to them. So we have various hours every day of the week that's going to be available for people to go in.
Okay. And are you open to receiving recommendations in the white spots that's on the map right now? So I'm thinking of like Kalamazoo and 44th area in
sure.
Town and Country. I think there would be a really good, it would be a really good space to have a assistance center.
Yes, we are open.
Okay.
And this is the first picture that we've taken of this map.
Okay.
I have more to add to this, so this is continuing, but yes, we would like to add more if you have some recommendations.
Great. Thank you.
And I'll add to that, Commissioner. I know that we've been working really closely with the public library, and I recently met with the CEO, and all of the libraries will be assistance centers as well.
Perfect.
And so they'll be available during the hours that the library's open.
Oh, that's great.
And there will be a list of them available soon, and it will include their hours of operation. They're not all going to have the same hours of operation. Some of them aren't open every day of the week, but that'll be published.
Great.
We're also working closely with the city clerk to have census information available at precinct polling locations during the March election.
Oh, great.
For Tuesday. Mini Super Tuesday. All right, Commissioner?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions and then one thought. Can you talk about any of the work that we're doing sort of internally? We were in an appointments meeting, but will this be shared with those citizen members of our commissions? You know, just thinking about people who are already actively engaged with the city who could also potentially be ambassadors. And then wondering what the coordination might be with our Kent County Department of Health and Human Services, thinking about the multitude of individuals who have active cases, who receive regular mailings, kind of like a water bill, and how, if there's any coordination on the state level?
So your idea regarding the board and commission members is a great one, and that's one we haven't been working on. So we're going to put that on our list. And then we have been cooperating, partnering with the county, and it's something that we've brought up previously. Health and Human Services, Health Department, other county departments that are customer facing. working with them. I don't know how many of them will be assistance centers. We haven't gotten to that yet, but we do know that they'll at least be able to provide information. So that is one we're working on with the county.
Okay.
And Commissioner, the county has dedicated as the point person their communications director. So they're the ones that have been working with the city, and they're a part of the Complete Count Committee.
Okay. Great. And then I think I wanted to speak to the question that Commissioner Moody had earlier about those in the immigrant refugee community. I think, there's a lot of efforts, and I've been part of the Complete Census Committee since the beginning, really recognizing that how can we make this process as reduce the amount of fear that individuals have. But I want us to remember that those fears that individuals have, that's their feeling, that's their reality. And so how can we balance that? We can never take away that sense of security because we are not in their positions. And so just remembering that, because we don't know what's going to happen with this data. That could change over time. And I think breaches that are happening because of geopolitical concerns globally. So those are, I just wanted to point that out, that we can make people feel as comfortable, but that still may not be enough because of their own lived experience in our community.
Right, and Kathy can speak to this as well, but I think our approach has been to provide them, to provide all individuals, including those who may have immigration-related fears, with the facts as best we know them. But we are careful not to, be dismissive of people's fears or say like, you just shouldn't be afraid because we've provided you with these facts. Like, we are trying to be sensitive in terms of, yes, those opinions and feelings are real, but can be balanced with the facts as best we know them, and then people can make their own decisions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
One of my ways of addressing that issue is to meet with their leaders first. Once I've talked to the leaders and they're good with the conversation, then we allow them to go back and talk to their community. And we're there and answering questions or whatever, but we have to cross that barrier first with their leadership, because a lot of them look to their leadership for answers. Same with the churches. We talk to them first. And so with some of those that have the fear of the immigration problems, once their leaders talk to them and explain to them, we had an event a couple weeks ago with the Butte community. Their leaders are the ones that had to stand in front and talk to them about the census. We talk to them, they talk to their people, and that works. That helps. That still might not answer all of their questions, but that helps them relieve some of that fear that they may have with filling out the paperwork.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, any final questions? All right, so I anticipate that you'll start to send information to the City Commission that we can help share with our networks. Oh, okay. And I know that there will be information on social media, and commissioners, you're welcome, obviously, to repost that. And then we'll have a number of meetings coming up over the next several months, gearing up for the count day. So I'll turn to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to thank Mr. Canfield and Ms. Harris for their work. They stand on behalf of a team of people, both internally and external, to our organization as part of the Complete Count Committee. I want to thank everyone for their effort and you for your support that actually began during the budget process as we envisioned this. So we went from concept to actual construct with what they're doing, and we're probably the most aggressive in the educational awareness campaign among communities around our area, as we should be. And so I want to thank them for their very deliberate, tactical, surgical communication, because we could do the general, media blast, one size fits all, but that is not the approach, and they have been very deliberate to make sure it's customized to the needs of our community. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our third item, and this is a resolution adopting the city's legislative priority agenda for consideration for the 2019-2020 Michigan Legislature.
So moved.
Support.
All right, and with us today, we have our government affairs specialist, Ms. Farrick, here to walk us through some highlights on this.
Good morning. The resolution before you today advances the state legislative priority agenda, and the purpose is to clearly outline the position and interests of the city. It provides direction on the city's top 4 state legislative funding priorities and names those as follows: prevention of childhood lead poisoning and exposure, including investment and increased funding options for lead paint remediation, local options and tools to support increased housing, the River Restoration and Revitalization Project, and district court funding reform and equitable investment in district court services. The resolution also details the principles to be used by the city manager, the legislative affairs manager, or me, and the legislative committee in initiating, evaluating, and responding to legislative initiatives that impact the city and its residents. Finally, the resolution signifies the city's support of the following specific statewide initiatives that align with this legislative priority agenda as follows. Focused investment and funding for lead paint remediation, driver's licenses for all, expansion of the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, continuation of the Good Jobs for Michigan program, bail reform, restoring the State Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program, and district court funding reform. The Legislative Committee developed a draft state legislative priority agenda, which was reviewed and discussed at the August 2019 meeting of the committee, and then again in December, when they made final revisions and unanimously agreed to advance a resolution to this full body with a recommendation for adoption. The state legislative priority agenda is aligned with the city's strategic plan and reflects the city's values and strategic priorities. This agenda will promote the city's vision to strive to be nationally recognized as an equitable, welcoming, innovative, and collaborative city with a robust economy, safe and healthy community, and the opportunity for a high quality of life for all. I look forward to working with our state advocacy firm to initiate, evaluate, and respond to legislation and initiatives that impact the city and its residents. And we will work with all three branches of government and stakeholders to advance the city's priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. So Commissioners, this is a new process, and many of you will recall that last year we started to work with a new government affairs agency. And with that, we've had a number of conversations about what we can do to improve some of our processes related to legislative priorities. The legislative team has actually met multiple times talking about that. On that team is Commissioner O'Connor, who I'll turn to in a minute, and then unfortunately Commissioner Kelly, who's no longer here. So she worked really closely with us last year to bring this forward and to finalize it. And so I'll turn, I should say one more thing before I turn to Commissioner O'Connor. So these are broad, big picture issues that we're working on for this legislative term. There are issues, and you all know this, there are issues that come up in Lansing or in Washington, D.C. that we need to respond to, and then there's a whole host of things that we try to be proactive around. And so, there's always issues that come up that sometimes surprise us, and we have to meet pretty quickly to respond and figure out if we're going to be supportive or oppose or try to amend the language. And then also we work in partnership with our partners at the Michigan Municipal League. They also have a legislative agenda. And then there are some priorities that I work on with other mayors from large cities through the urban core mayors, which this year I moved into the chair position with that body. And then the same thing at the federal level. So little background on that. I know we've talked about that at the legislative team and as we finalize this. But I'll turn to Commissioner O'Connor to start. You have any additional comments or questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm just very excited to have a document like this that lives in our lives. We talk a lot about the challenges and struggles we face in Grand Rapids, and really having a document that's the big picture document, kind of aligning with our strategic plan, is important. And as the second largest city in Michigan, I think it's important that we drive policy discussion in Lansing. We don't react to policy discussion in Lansing. And so I think we've always historically done a great job of responding, whether that be in support or in opposition to legislature that our partners in Lansing present. But for us to have an opportunity to begin to kind of hone in on a discussion around tools and opportunities and challenges that we really need them to specifically address, and creating policy in Lansing that will help us better serve the residents of Grand Rapids, I think is important. So I'm excited to be able to get to work on this, and we have great relationships with a variety of people, both in our city who represent us, and as well as the region and across the state, who look to us as leaders in the way municipal government should be run. And so I'm excited to continue to expand those relationships and really drive home some positive change for people in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, thank you. And I should point out, we have Mr. Peter Dickow here with us today, who represents the Senator Gary Peters' office, and I know he's a good partner, strong partner for us in DC, so thanks for being here. All right, other questions or comments for Ms. Fair? Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm curious, I'm actually really happy that we will have kind of a platform that we're working from collectively as a body. So thank you to the committee for the work that's gone into this. I am curious about more details behind the categories. I think, Mayor, you indicated that they're a little bit broad, but I'm wondering if we can have some of the details talked about here a little bit, so that we can know when we're having individual conversations with legislators, like kind of what's behind those things. I'm accustomed to at the schools where we would have very specific legislative outcomes that we're seeking. So we're asking for a change very specifically. And so I'm just curious to know, for example, with supporting increased housing. So obviously HUD probably would be tied to that, in MISTA. And so I'm wondering, like, what are we going to ask them for specifically, and so that, we can say, do these two things, and this can be the outcome of that in our city. Have you gotten that far with this?
I would say on some of the items we have, and then on others, we're still, with the new administration and with new department leadership in Lansing, we're still working through some of that.
Okay.
And so that is, I would say, a work in progress that the city staff have been doing in partnership with our government affairs team and firm that we're working with. I don't know,
say something?
Commissioner
Yeah,
O'Connor, you
and
wanna
I think,
add
thank
to
you,
that?
Mayor, like the issue of district court funding, and Deputy City Manager DeLong has been intimately involved in
Yeah.
kind of a global discussion about that, and so that's, that has probably is more fleshed out than understanding tools for affordable housing, and so those are things where, again, we want to make sure that it's known to the public that these are the priorities, these are the things we're going to hold as, issues we want to find partners to support our initiatives. Well, the fleshed out details of what we're actually looking for are not fully vetted at this point, but we want it to be, we want it to be known now, as we have this new body and a new legislative team, that these are things we're going to be really focusing on and diving into to try to find tools to help.
Yeah, and if you have like minutes from those meetings available, if you could send those, that I think would at least help. And if you're interested in any feedback from us about items that should be on the list, let us know how we can go about being a part of what's being brought forward. I'm just thinking about the conversation with the weapons ordinance and, us having an element within that policy that conflicts with state law. So, why not add that to our legislative list, so that then we can see the outcome that we think should be a state law that will impact us locally. I think the other piece that I was also looking at was the funding for lead paint remediation. We've had this conversation for a long time. And, I think even being very specific with them at the state level, and I'm curious to know, how does this list then impacts federal lobbying, that, because we also have others who are lobbying for us federally. But just, how do we go about being very specific with this one in particular? Because I know we've had a lot of conversations about what funding, diversity in funding, and what that would look like for remediation. And then the driver's license for all, I think this is another good one to have kind of here on this list. But I think, we had the letter, we had the conversation a few months ago about, I think my recommendation was to turn the letter into a resolution, so that then when the governor is seeing something coming from us, or our lobbyists coming to them asking for this change from the city of Grand Rapids, there's something on the books that says the city of Grand Rapids is supportive of that. So I'm still advocating for us to have an ordinance that support what we have here in this legislative priority list here.
Well, I'm happy to speak to a couple of those. Thank you for that feedback. So let me talk a little bit about the lead. So we are looking at a couple of the recommendations that have been talked about around the lead force task force. And we are actively looking at potential language that we would propose for some current, like brownfield or other types of abatements. So that is also, I would say, in progress. We can absolutely forward information related to some of the other ones that we have more information on. All of you, I believe, received the full report from the court funding recommendations. If not, we'll make sure that all of you have that. You know, in regards to, you know, our hope was that we would put all of our priorities in a resolution and adopt those. And we have gone on record in different ways, legislative ways, to clearly share our support for specific legislation. So we are on record in Lansing supporting the expansion of Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. We've done that through the appropriate process. If that moves forward, we will go on record again. So again, this would be consistent with that. We've gone on record in writing in support of the continuation of the Good Jobs for Michigan program. So again, those aren't historically, and I would argue there's good reason to keep it open so that we are both proactive and reactive and can respond to things and include everything in one core resolution that will allow us to move forward when those issues come up. So, Commissioner, we've talked about that as well. I don't know if you want to add anything, and then I'll turn to Commissioner Jones.
No, I mean, again, I think this has been, I've had the pleasure of serving on legislative for a few years now, and just to get it to the point that we actually have a document that has this in it was in itself, you know, now that we have Karen on board, and we didn't have a director for a hot minute there, and so I feel like this is good progress, and you know, the goal is to get better every time we do this, and I think there's some exciting things in the future. You know, speaking to what we did at GRPS, I mean, that was clearly the model I tried to utilize because we did it quite well there, I thought, and then we have the same firm in Lansing representing us that represents GRPS, and so looking to some of those strategies as we move forward, you know, I think we have a good template to work with.
Commissioner Jones, who will be joining our legislative team.
Yep, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, and thank you, Karen, for your update. I wanted to suggest that, or ask the question of maybe now is the time for us to be very strategic in our efforts to get at some of these issues and to, Mayor, you mentioned your chairmanship, I think, with the Urban Mayors Group. I think about an issue like driver's license for all, and I think about the fact that, you know, here we are along with Detroit, two largest cities in the state, and the power of the voices of perhaps you and Mayor Dugan really advocating and pushing for this. I think in a way that perhaps hasn't been seen before. I don't know if there's a significant history of Detroit and Grand Rapids working in a more collaborative and a more assertive way to push through legislation, but I think now would be the time for issues like that, issues like the expansion of the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act, and with regards to lead paint remediation, I keep going back to, or in my mind, there's the potential to strategically connect with Flint, although it's lead pipes, it's lead. And so the idea of us working in a much more strategic way with other cities that are seeing similar issues and really pushing in every possible way to get some of these things done. And so I'd love to see us do that in a way that, again, historically has not been done. And if not now, then when, right? So.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner.
Yep.
You'll be a welcomed voice around that table, even though we'll miss Commissioner Kelly. All right, other questions or comments? Commissioner?
Thank you. Thanks for preparing this to the Legislative Committee, and Karen, thanks for walking us through this. I had a few questions of about 3 points. One was really around the intent versus the outcomes. So we were putting out this language, thinking about how do we tie this into the performance and accountability measures. And so, if there's any comments around that, that would be helpful to understand how are we doing month over month or quarter over quarter as it relates to these priorities that we've listed. This is a little bit different than the legislative committee, but I think it's important when we talk about operationalizing equity in our city, is looking at what is a legislative priority and also looking at what are our internal practices as it relates to the policies that we might put forth around how we identify publicly stating our support or approval for different initiatives that exist at the state and federal level. So I don't know if that could also be discussed or looked at around, because I always think, sometimes we can wait for the legislation, but what are the things that we can do today as a body, as an entity, to make sure that we are making those best decisions? I think about Commissioner Jones and the speaker that he brought with the Urban League in December, Dr. Kendi, who talked not only about diversity, race, and equity and inclusion, but really about how do we be anti-racist in our actions, and that we have an opportunity for that. In number 2, item number 3, talks about encouraging, advocate, and support legislation that promotes equity, diversity, inclusion for all. Very supportive of this statement. I also wonder, it feels more general than what we have in the rest of the resolution, where that is more part of our strategic plan and our vision and, sort of the guiding principles and values of the city. So I don't know if that's potentially redundant. And the last thing I do want to say, I do want to go on record. It was Commissioner Lanier just brought this up, and I can't remember what meeting it was in 2019, but I do want to state that I do support a resolution for driver's licenses for all. I do want that to be on the record here today. Thank you.
Great, thanks. All right, any other questions? I'm sorry, our city manager wanted to respond to the question related to performance.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a great discussion for the dais, and before I address that one specifically, just wanted to put a little bit more context. The frequency and the speed in which our legislature engages and acts requires us to have guidance more than just monthly or periodically from the legislative committee. And so what we were looking for was something very comprehensive at the strategy level, but not at the operational level, because we can come back with the specific work plans, work those through committee. But the thought was, when you look at our strategic plan in all the areas, we don't have legislative strategy embedded in the plan. It's because the legislation of advocacy is a tool we use to further the strategies that are already there. So our performance outcomes are consistent with what's the performance outcomes in the strategic plan. Then how do we use legislation to accelerate those outcomes, whether it's health and safety and lead remediation? Is it more funding that we need to accomplish through legislative advocacy and legislative affairs, or if it's more regulatory things that we want to improve the safety of our community, less unsafe interactions with gun violence, is it through legislative advocacy, and we start looking at reductions in crime, et cetera. And so that was the thinking, to make sure that there is a strategy that we have for legislation that's tied back to the strategic plan. I think in terms of getting to the specifics of a work plan after we get the policy, I mean, this is year one of our first year effort in attempting that. I think that's something the staff can do as we focus on the priorities, but knowing we identified the priorities for that reason. We're not going to be working proactively on legislation on everything on this list. Some of it will be a tool that our Ms. Farrick will be using in conversations with other legislatures or other agencies in intergovernmental assistance, but we will be proactive. We will prioritize the kind of regulatory or legislation that regulation and legislation we want to see, and that we need to have specific outcomes from. So if we want to have our local land bank, like Detroit is the only city in the state that has the ability to have their local land bank. That is a specific outcome and measurement we can have, but we have not affirmed that yet. We've talked about it, and that is a specific measurable outcome. But other things, it would be, we can have performance metrics that relate to the already established strategy that we have in our strategic plan.
Thank you, City Manager. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to our fourth item, and this is a resolution approving polling locations and fixing election inspector pay for the March 10th, 2020 presidential primary election. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, City Clerk, you want to tell us about this?
Yeah, first of all, I was proud to be part of the hoop crew on Friday, so, and Justin and Amy, so it was fun. So thanks for allowing me to play 2 minutes of stellar basketball. It was not Winston worthy, though. So, anyway, more seriously, we have an election coming up. Welcome to 2020, everybody. It's been 2020 in my mind ever since the November election ended. And so, so what we sent out our annual contracts to polling place, our biannual polling locations, and this is the time where they re-sign up for the next 2 years. And so the Diocese of Grand Rapids said they don't want to use their schools anymore because they don't, GRPS has a day off and they're in, on November election day, but the Catholic schools do not. And so we got word that we cannot no longer use St. James or St. Thomas. And then they're allowing us to use West Catholic for one more election. So for August and November, I'll have to find a new location up in precinct 23. But there's some, so First Ward Commissioners, if you can think of something up there. But I think I already have a couple ideas up there. So we're all set with St. James is going to move to Stocking School because I did some rearranging up on top of the hill. And then Living Word Church is part of the of all the stuff that's going on in the Boston Square area, and they're doing some remodeling of that building, and it's under new management. And so that precinct is going to be moving to Boston Square Church. So that'll alleviate some of the issues that we had in the last year. And that's a great central location in that precinct as well. And then precinct 33 is going from St. Thomas to Aquinas College with an asterisk. They're all, I would say we're 95% there. They have to sign the contract yet. And so the facilities director that I've been working with needs to talk to the CFO to actually finalize that contract. My issue is if that doesn't work, so I need a, so right now we're approving Aquinas College as that precinct, and then if that is not available, the state law gives me emergency location. So we're gonna, if for some reason they say that doesn't work, I'm pretty sure we're good on that. But we have a couple other locations that I've been in contact with the Salvation Army if we have to do something in an emergency situation. So I think we're 95% there, but until I have a contract in hand, I don't send out voter cards. So that's where we're at on that one. And then there's no change from the election pay. We up those election pays. We haven't brought that to the commission as a regular part, but that's part of the charter. So I'm trying to make these resolutions of what is the responsibility of the election commission, what's the responsibility of the city commission. And sometimes they get a little bit blurred because our charter goes above and beyond what state law says. So I think we're exactly where we need to be in these resolutions.
Great, thank you. Well, City Clerk, over the holiday, I read our city charter again, and I think it would be helpful, at least for me and probably some of the other folks around this table, to maybe have some clarity around what is in the charter specifically related to elections that is superseded by state law and is no longer relevant. Actually, there's a lot in our city charter that is archaic and outdated. And so that may be helpful for us to know as you kind of sift through that and try to figure out what comes before us and what doesn't need to. I know it would be helpful for me because I'm not as familiar with state law around elections.
Right, and then, the other part I wanted to bring up that's in the resolution as well, other than that, which is extra because with the initiation of the enactment legislation with Proposal 3. So Proposal 3 said one thing, but then there was enactment legislation that, so when we want to use additional facilities for, other than City Hall for doing absentee issuance, which was never an issue before, but this was part, so I was trying to do some things that are outside of this building to make it easier access to people. So, so we have a new office that we're getting set up at 201 Market or Election Central, where we can do absentee ballots. So because we're gonna have so many absentee ballots, the second floor is not conducive for doing, 50,000 absentees if we get to that point. We need to, so we can keep everything in one place instead of moving, just more efficient. So the first one is gonna be using Election Central 201 Market Avenue for that. Also, doing some things in some non-traditional areas. So tentatively in mid-February, we're gonna have a absentee in-person event at the Baxter Community Center and the next day at the Hispanic Center.
Good.
So, but the city commission has to designate those locations. It says, I can set times and places, or set times and availability, but the commission has to set these outside of the absentee. And we're gonna test doing like 2 Sundays before the election, like we did before a general election. But we're gonna try at 2-1 Market Election Central, test it so we can do a bigger event in October. And we'll publicize through all of our social media and various other things. And then also, just so you know, on getting word out, we're piggybacking on the Census's RFP for election communication. Since they had an RFP going out for communication design and stuff, which we did in 2016 for somebody to design billboards and various other things. So that's just another tactic that we're working on, doing some of the stuff that was similar in 2016.
Great, thanks. All right, questions, Commissioner? And then Commissioner Moody, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Just a quick question on the compensation for the locations. I see the compensation for the volunteers who work the polls, but we also, it seems that we had a conversation about the locations. Was it $100 or something?
So we had that conversation. Nowhere in charter or state law, it says, nowhere does it say setting the fees that we will charge, or which we will reimburse. So yeah, when I started, it was 60. We moved it up to 100, and for this election, for this contract, we moved up to 150 per election.
You
So,
did change
so we, there was a couple of churches that were like, okay, for 100, no, for 150, yes. So, when, some places, some communities don't charge anything, and it's just to get their neighbors in. That's how I sell it to churches. Where else can you have your whole neighborhood come in your doors? But, so that's where we're at. We're at 150 now. And we'll probably stay there for a while for this 2-year contract, then we'll revisit it in 2 years.
Happy to hear it.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Commissioner Moody?
Yeah, just for clarification, Joe, for the precinct 62, could you explain, I think I heard you, but I want some clarity. How are you planning on getting the information out to that precinct?
Yeah.
That they're at Boston Square Church and not at Living Word now?
Thanks, Commissioner. That's a great question. So anytime we change polling locations, we have to mail out new voting cards. So everybody in those precincts will get new voter ID cards. It'll tell them what their polling location is.
Now, is that the only communication that they get is polling cards?
That will be the only direct. That'll be the only direct that they get. And then if we have to do an emergency change, then we mail out postcards to allow the, if like a school's doing a asbestos remediation or something's under construction, then we send out postcards. But we'll also be doing things through, these wrap-ups and then also through social media. But yeah, every voter gets a new voter register or voter ID card.
Okay, my next question is, just from my knowledge, I don't
Sure.
know this, but the individuals who work the polling booths, are they paid or is that volunteer?
Yeah, no, that's paid. That's in that resolution. So
Is it-
a person who is a chairperson,
Is
they
that
get,
$150 too?
no, they get, the chairperson gets $200 for the day. Someone who is working the e-poll book, which is the computer that has the list, they get $180, and then a general worker gets $165. And since you're not on the ballot this year, you could work if you're looking for a side hustle.
You want a job, Commissioner?
I have too many now. My biggest concern is I'm just looking at the fact that you only pay a church X amount of dollars, but the workers get paid quite a bit, but you're using the the energy of the church, electricity of the church, the heat and so forth. I think in the future, we should consider upping that price, even if it's not a church or any polling facility should be compensated comfortably for the use of their building.
All right, we'll
That's
let
just
you
something to think
work
about.
on your budget.
I just have a quick follow-up
We just
question,
have
if
to
I
figure out a
may.
way to put it in the budget, because we're paying people to sit there all day, which is great, which I have no problem with that. But the use of the facilities, it seems like we're kind of shortchanging them.
Yeah.
May I ask a follow-up question to Commissioner Moody's question about notification? Would you then, Joel, on Election Day, have notices at the former locations
Yes.
directing them to
Sorry,
the
sorry,
new place? I
that's
just
the
wanted
other
to
part
add
of
that
it.
for
When
you.
we change the locations, we have to put a notice at the old location.
So then if someone didn't get the memo, they know
Yep.
to go.
And it's and then also, if people are checking, I guess I'll do one more plug before you go. If you go to michigan.gov/vote, michigan.gov/vote, you can put in your information, it'll show where your precinct is. So all this information gets put into their list.
My other thought is I'm concerned about our senior citizens community who may not have computer access and who sometimes may not look at their mail, but are very strong in voting.
Yep.
I want to make sure that
Be
information
the first ones
gets
to look
out.
at their mail.
Yeah.
And once again, absentee is for everybody.
Yeah.
So if anybody's concerned about precincts and lines or whatever, there's no line at your mailbox.
City Manager, did you want to add something?
No, I just acknowledge the conversation about the fees. We'll take that in consideration and also look at what we charge the public for using our community facilities and see how that compares.
All right, thanks. All right, any other questions? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, Commissioners, so today we have Economic Development Project Team at 12:30 in room 601. So if you serve on that, make sure you are down there at 12:30. And then we're back in here tonight for our 7 o'clock meeting. And with that, we are adjourned.
Sandra put that.